Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're traveling into a world that is rarely talked about and even more rarely understood. A world where museums don't just preserve history. They contain objects considered too hazardous, too cursed, or too ethically complicated to show the public. These are not your typical museums, filled with paintings, fossils, and artifacts behind politely labeled signs. These museums hold things that were never meant to be handled casually, never intended for the average visitor to stand next to, and in some cases, never meant to be touched again at all. Most people walk into a museum assuming everything inside is safe, curated, and conserved under perfectly controlled conditions. But deep inside certain archives, sealed rooms, locked cabinets, and heavily restricted vaults, there are items considered unstable, cursed, toxic, or simply too dangerous to risk placing on display. Some are filled with chemicals that can still burn skin a century later. Some carry diseases we barely understand. Some are radioactive enough to set off alarms. And some have stories attached to them that make people genuinely uncomfortable, even the curators who study them. Today we're exploring real museums around the world that contain items too dangerous to display. These strange, disturbing, mysterious, or outright deadly artifacts raise questions about how much of our past we truly understand and how much of it we're still afraid of. Let's begin with one of the most unsettling artifacts ever discovered in England, the Hand of Glory. It sits today inside the Whitby Museum, sealed in glass, blackened, shriveled, and preserved far more perfectly than anyone can explain. A hand of glory is a grim object from medieval folklore, a severed hand taken from an executed criminal, supposedly treated with occult methods and lit like a candle to freeze everyone inside a house while thieves robbed it. The idea sounds like something straight out of horror fiction, yet people believed in it enough to actually create them. The Whitby hand was discovered in 1935 inside the wall of an old cottage. Hidden deliberately, hidden carefully, and hidden for a reason no one truly understands. When scientists examined it, they confirmed it was real human tissue preserved unnaturally well. The preservation method remains a mystery, and even today, curators say staff members feel uneasy around it. Not a single person likes moving it when exhibits are rearranged. It's the kind of object that makes you feel watched, even though it can't possibly see you. Whether you believe in folklore or not, there's something undeniably unnerving about holding, or even standing near, a severed hand deliberately prepared for magic. People visit expecting unusual displays, and they definitely get them. The place looks like an old library from the outside, but instead of books, the cabinets are filled with jars containing preserved organs, skeletons with rare deformities. Tumorous skulls with medical conditions, and tissues collected from people who lived and died long before modern medicine existed. It is macabre, disturbing, and deeply educational, but few visitors stop to consider the danger. Many of these preserved specimens date back to the 1800s and early 1900s, when preservation chemicals were essentially whatever happened to work. That meant arsenic, mercury, formaldehyde, substances that don't exactly lose their potency with age. During renovations, entire wings of the museum had to be sealed off, because fumes began leaking from ancient jars. Staff needed protective gear just to be near certain shelves. And then there's the biological risk. Some specimens belong to people who died from infectious diseases, when medicine had no concept of sterilization or transmission. Could the tissues still be contagious? Most researchers say no. But most is not always reassuring when you're standing 5 inches away from a jar containing the lung of someone who died from smallpox. Because of these hazards and ethical concerns, ranging from consent issues to the fragility of the specimens, a large part of the Mutter Museum's collection is never displayed. Not because it's uninteresting, but because it's too dangerous, too unstable, or simply too ethically complicated. Heading west to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, we arrive at the Delbridge Museum of Natural History, which shut down completely in 2023 after officials made a shocking discovery. The taxidermy animals, every single one of them, were contaminated with toxic chemicals. Back in the early 1900s, taxidermists used arsenic soup to preserve hides. It was a widely accepted method, extremely effective at preventing insect damage, and extremely dangerous to humans. A century later, these animals had become silent time bombs. Tests at the Great Plains Zoo revealed carcinogenic dust spreading from the preserved specimens, posing a genuine health hazard. Restoring them was impossible. Cleaning them was dangerous. Displaying them was irresponsible. So officials made the unthinkable decision. They locked the museum and prepared to dispose of the entire collection. Visitors walked past those displays for decades without realizing they were breathing in traces of poison. Old preservation methods weren't just questionable. they left behind problems we're still discovering. But some museums hold items too dangerous not because of chemicals or physical hazards, but because of ethical boundaries and biohistory. The National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland houses shelves upon shelves of medical specimens. Amputated limbs, preserved organs, tissues from Civil War soldiers, fetuses collected for early scientific studies, and anatomical abnormalities once used to train doctors. Many of these items are still stored in the original 19th century preservatives. The seals on those jars weaken over time. Football seep out. Staff must use ventilation systems and protective gear when handling them. And then comes the ethical weight. Many specimens were collected without consent, taken from patients, soldiers, or babies who never agreed become museum pieces. So, even when the artifacts are stable enough to display, museums must decide whether it is morally acceptable to do so. Many choose to keep them locked away, accessible only to researchers who handle them with immense care. Even institutions as large and respected as the Smithsonian have their own dangerous secrets. Deep in storage lie trays of watches, aircraft panels, and medical tools coated in radium paint. In the early 1900s, radium was a miracle material. It glowed brightly. It symbolized progress. It was used on everything from wristwatches to household items. No one understood how deadly it was. Workers who painted these items, mostly young women, suffered horrifying radiation poisoning. They became known as the Radium Girls. Today, those same items reside in lead-lined cabinets, setting off Geiger counters when handled. Conservators must wear protective gear just to catalog them. Some pieces emit enough radiation that they can't be safely displayed for more than short periods. Alongside them sits uranium glass, radioactive medical treatments, and bizarre radium-based health products once marketed as miracle cures. Early science took risks, and museums inherited the fallout, literally. New Orleans offers another museum with charm on the outside and danger on the inside. The New Orleans Pharmacy Museum looks like a quaint apothecary display, complete with antique wooden cabinets and vintage medicine bottles. It's even a popular venue for weddings. But inside those cabinets are real pharmaceutical substances dating back to the 19th century. Arsenic, mercury chloride, opium tinctures, and powders that have crystallized over time, increasing their instability. Some bottles haven't been opened in over 100 years. And for good reason. If they break, they could release fumes or dust harmful enough to require evacuation. The museum also contains voodoo cures and love potions that included narcotics, hallucinogens, and toxic herbs. It feels whimsical until you realize the shelf you are admiring holds enough hazardous material to be considered a chemical incident if disturbed. But danger takes many forms, and in London, the British Museum houses an artifact famous not for chemicals, but for a centuries-old reputation of misfortune, the unlucky mummy. It's not an actual mummy, but a coffin lid depicting a priestess from around 950 BCE. For more than a century, people have blamed it for accidents, illnesses, deaths, and even the sinking of the Titanic. Early collectors who possessed it reported streaks of terrible luck. Newspapers amplified the legend, and soon the artifact became a symbol of ancient curses. While modern staff don't believe in curses, some visitors refuse to photograph it, and others avoid walking too closely. Whether superstition or psychological suggestion, the artifact has a presence that people undeniably feel. London also brings us the case of Charles Byrne, the Irish giant, whose skeleton was displayed in the Hunterian Museum for over 200 years despite Byrne's explicit wishes to be buried at sea. He feared being dissected or displayed, a fear that was ignored when surgeons secretly acquired his body after death. For centuries, his skeleton stood as a scientific curiosity, but modern ethical standards finally caught up. In 2017, the museum removed it from display. It still exists for research purposes, but it remains locked away, seen only by select specialists. The debate continues. Should it be buried now, honoring his wishes, or preserved because of its scientific value? 跨越海洋，我们找到了有史以来最大最神秘的中世纪手稿之一——巨型手稿 Codex Gigas， 又称魔鬼圣经。这本书近3英尺高，重达165磅，里面有一幅巨大的撒旦插图和数百页精心书写的文字。传说，一个僧侣为了免于处决，与魔鬼立下契约，一夜之间写成了这本书。不管这传说是真是假，这本书在另一个方面也很危险。它的墨水和装订材料含有毒素，徒手触摸它会引起不良反应。它的书页非常脆弱，现在几乎没有人被允许触碰它。它静静地躺在瑞典国家图书馆的玻璃柜后面，几乎被当作来自过去黑暗篇章的活异物来对待。And finally, There is the Warren Occult Museum, infamous not just for its collection, but for the stories behind it. Run by paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, the museum held items from their real-life cases: haunted paintings, cursed instruments, vampire coffins, shrunken heads, and of course, Annabelle, the Raggedy Ann doll believed to be responsible for attacks, injuries, and one fatal motorcycle crash. The doll sits behind glass with the warning sign, "Positively do not open." Lorraine Warren claimed the doll was treated like a loaded weapon. Priests blessed the room regularly. People who mocked the doll reportedly faced severe consequences. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, thousands of visitors left the museum convinced there was something wrong with that doll. The museum is now closed to the public, but the collection remains locked away, hidden, and protected. These museums remind us of a strange truth: history isn't always safe. The past contains dangers we never expected: chemical, biological, radioactive, ethical, psychological, and even supernatural. Not everything can be placed behind glass, with a label and a friendly museum gift shop on the way out. Some objects were never meant for casual viewing. Some were created with intentions we barely understand. Some simply belong to another world, one that doesn't mix well with ours. And yet humans keep preserving these objects, studying them, sheltering them in locked rooms, because despite the risk, they hold pieces of our story, pieces too important or too mysterious to forget. Thank you for joining me on this strange journey into museums that contain items too dangerous to display. If you enjoyed deep dives into hidden history, forbidden artifacts, and the darker side of museums, make sure you subscribe. There are many more mysteries waiting behind locked doors.